So let's start with the recitation of the three principal aspects of the path. I had that one typo in the version that you have on the sheet, so maybe let's go to the prayer book to do this, just to make sure that we've got the right version. On page 141 of the Gold Prayer Book. So again, this is the short prayer that's composed by Lama Tsongkhapa that we're working with in this class, these 3 Tuesdays. So if you were here for last week's class, then you can bring to mind the teachings that we went through in regard to the first 5 verses and try to generate that mind of renunciation that is the main topic of that part. And then we'll go on to bodhicitta, which is the next set of verses, and then finally the view of emptiness, these 3 principal teachings that are encompassed in this very brief text. So again, we'll begin on 141. I bow down to my perfect gurus, the essential meaning of the victorious one's teachings, the path praised by all the holy victors and their children, the gateway of the fortunate ones desiring liberation. This I shall try to explain as much as I can. Those who are not attached to the pleasures of circling samsara, who strive to make freedom and endowments meaningful, who entrust themselves to the path pleasing the victors. You fortunate ones, listen with a calm mind. Without the complete intention definitely to be free from circling, there is no way to pacify attachment seeking pleasurable effects in the ocean of circling. Also, by craving for cyclic existence, embodied beings are continuously bound. Therefore, at the very beginning, seek renunciation. Freedom and endowments are difficult to find, and life has no time to spare. By gaining familiarity with this, attraction to the appearances of this life is reversed. By thinking over and over again that actions and their effects are unbetraying, and repeatedly contemplating the miseries of cyclic existence, attraction to the appearances of future lives is reversed. When, by having trained in that way, there is no arising, even for a second, of attraction to the perfections of cyclic existence, and all day and night the intention seeking liberation arises, then the thought of renunciation has been generated. Even if renunciation has been developed, if it is not possessed by the mind of enlightenment, it does not become the cause of the perfect bliss of unsurpassed enlightenment. Therefore, the wise generate the supreme mind of enlightenment. Swept away by the current of the 4 powerful rivers, tied by the tight bonds of karma, so hard to undo, caught in the iron net of self-grasping, completely enveloped by the total darkness of ignorance, endlessly reborn in cyclic existence, ceaselessly tormented by the 3 sufferings, think that all mothers are in such a condition, generate the supreme mind of enlightenment. In short, if like the mother whose cherished son has fallen into a pit of fire, and who experiences even 1 second of his suffering as an unbearable eternity, your reflection on the suffering of all mother sentient beings has made it impossible for you to bear their suffering for even 1 second, and the wish seeking enlightenment for their sake arises without effort. Then you have realized the supreme precious mind of enlightenment. Without the wisdom realizing ultimate reality, even though you have generated renunciation and the mind of enlightenment, you cannot cut the root cause of circling. Therefore, attempt the method to realize dependent arising. One who sees the cause and effect of all phenomena of both cyclic existence and the state beyond sorrow as forever unbetraying, and for whom any object trusted in by the grasping mind has completely disappeared, has at that time entered the path pleasing the Buddhas. If the appearance of dependent relation, which is unbetraying, is accepted separately from emptiness, and as long as they are seen as separate, then one has still not realized the Buddha's intent. If these two realizations are happening simultaneously without alternation, and from merely seeing dependent relation as completely unbetraying, the definite ascertainment comes that completely destroys the way all objects are apprehended as truly existent. At that time, the analysis of the ultimate view is complete. Furthermore, appearance eliminates the extreme of existence, and emptiness eliminates the extreme of non-existence. If you realize how emptiness manifests in the manner of cause and effect, then you are not captivated by wrong notions holding extreme views. In this way, you realize exactly the vital points of the three principal aspects of the path. Resort to seeking solitude, generate the power of effort, and quickly accomplish your final goal, my child. Then go back to page 98. We'll just do one more prayer before we begin the refuge in bodhicitta before the teaching. Let's do this once in English and then twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi, daki chunyen gipe sonam gi, dola penchir sangye drupar sho, sangye chodam soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dagni kyapsu chi, daki chunyen gipe sonam gi, dola penchir sangye drupar sho. Okay. You can set the prayer books aside. Let's go ahead and do just a short meditation before we begin. So again, our meditation, we do two parts to it. The first is just to focus the mind a bit by using the breath as our focal point, our meditation object. And then on the basis of that, we'll cultivate our motivation for being here tonight. And as part of this, we'll review this mind of renunciation that precedes the motivation of bodhicitta, that is the main topic we're going to be discussing tonight, that second principal aspect of the path. So just find a good meditation posture, begin to pay attention to the breath in whatever way is suitable for your mind. If you don't have a technique you normally use, then just tune into the sensation that occurs as you breathe in and out through the nostrils. Occurs just inside the tip of the nose or on the upper lip, wherever you feel the air going into the nose, breathing down, breathing in, and then coming out of the nose when you breathe out. And just stay present with that sensation, or whatever way you're working with the breath. And then be vigilant, paying attention so that when the mind wanders, we notice that, and we let go of whatever it was that distracted us, and return back to the breath. So I'll ring the chime. We'll do this in silence for just a few minutes, and then I'll lead you in setting motivation. So as I mentioned, we'll first meditate on renunciation, which is the first principal aspect of the path that we discussed last week. This will be the mind from which bodhicitta develops, because we first have to look at our own situation quite clearly, have compassion for ourselves, and then we can generate the compassionate wish to benefit others. So we saw that there were two parts to cultivating renunciation. The first part was encapsulated in the lines, "Freedom and endowments are difficult to find, and life has no time to spare. By gaining familiarity with this, attraction to the appearances of this life is reversed." This is kind of the first step, that we have to let go of our attachment to this life. We spend an awful lot of time and energy in this life chasing after more mundane goals. Obviously, we do need to have the resources to be able to live this life, to be able to use this life well. But we can get caught up in the pleasures of this life so easily. So in the traditional teachings, we start from that vantage point of understanding the incredible value of this life. Being born as a human is rare and unique, especially when it's our human life where we have met with these teachings and have an interest in practicing them and studying them. All the conditions complete for us to use this life in a meaningful way. So if we do get preoccupied with great attachment for this life, no doubt we will only create the causes for us to not continue to have a good existence after this life ends. When death comes, we will not have created the causes and conditions to be able to have another fortunate rebirth like this one. So we have to let go of our attachment to this life so that we put energy into our next life, creating the causes and conditions for that by following the law of karma, especially engaging in the 10 virtues, avoiding the 10 non-virtuous actions. This is the initial level of renunciation, where we are simply turning away from the pleasures of this life, seeing that it's a bit of a trap. If we get totally caught up in it and don't do what we need to do to assure a good rebirth, then surely this life will have been wasted. But then we also have to let go of our attachment to even future lives. Lama Tsongkhapa says, by thinking over and over again that actions and their effects are unbetraying, and repeatedly contemplating the miseries of psychic existence, attraction to the appearances of future lives is reversed. So here we recognize that even if we were to get a good rebirth, a rebirth just like this one in a human life with all the perfect conditions, we still would have to suffer. We still would age and get ill and die and be separated from the things that we like and have to face the things we don't like. And so many different types of suffering, not just those coarser ones, but even the subtler ways that we are in an unsatisfactory condition. We are in samsara. By reflecting upon that, Lama Tsongkhapa says, to really get that point, that what we are involved in is not satisfactory, we then let go of our attachment even to future lives, and we seek the bliss of liberation. We develop the genuine mind of full renunciation that turns away from samsara and all of its pleasures, and desires freedom from all of that, an end to our suffering once and for all. And to just want this for yourself, as I mentioned last week, is an important step. It is compassion for ourselves. It is what allows us to have compassion for others when we've clearly seen our own situation and generated that wish to be free of our suffering. So cultivate this for just a moment or two before we go on to bodhicitta. So then, being very clear about our own situation, we're going to go tonight into how we cultivate bodhicitta. But we can see that just the very basis of it is to recognize that other beings are no different than ourselves. They're all caught up in the same predicament. They're all dealing with the same factors, being under the control of their karma, their delusions, continuing to suffer from life to life, never finding true satisfaction or peace. And because we have been connected to these beings in many, many ways through countless lifetimes, every one of them having been incredibly kind to us, we generate that feeling of affection and closeness towards them and dedicate ourselves to their welfare in addition to our own, thinking that we need to help all of these kind mother sentient beings. But in order to do that, we have to work on ourselves. In order to be more qualified to help others, we have to develop our own qualities. And this is the mind of bodhicitta that aspires to become a Buddha, to be fully enlightened, to go beyond our own personal liberation, so that we can benefit others. Because attaining that state, we will then have all the requisite qualities that are needed in order to bring sentient beings to the achievement of their own enlightenment. So cultivate this motivation in particular for tonight's class. Thinking that you're here to explore Lama Tsongkhapa's text, to be able to actualize Buddhahood for the sake of all kind mother sentient beings. Okay, so as I mentioned before we recited this, we went through verse 5 in the first class last Tuesday. So again, we had those sort of introductory verses that were just kind of setting us up for this very short text, and it's common to have a homage, a promise to compose, persuading to listen, what's covered there at the top of the first page. It's common to have those in almost every sort of text, commentary, treatise, what have you. And then we went on to the body of the teachings, and again we're talking about three main minds that we have to develop, three main thoughts that we're trying to cultivate, and they are really the essence of the entire path to enlightenment. So many of you come on Tuesday nights to study the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment with Venerable Tendrin, and so this is kind of encapsulating all those teachings into three essential points, three principal aspects. So the first one that we looked at again is this mind of renunciation. The verses that I read are at the bottom of page 1 there in the meditation. These are the main technique for developing renunciation, and they encapsulate. Again, the stages of the path are set out in 3 levels. These don't correspond directly to 3 principal aspects because the first 2 levels are what's behind this first principal aspect. The first level being that first part of verse 4 towards the bottom of the page there. And that's what we just meditated on, was again the idea that we have to let go of our attachment to this life, our preoccupation with comfort and material gain and all these things that we like to have that just sort of preoccupy our lives and only induce more attachment. And then we get to the end of this life and we haven't done anything that meaningful or purposeful with this life. So we have to, this is the first step. This is the being of the small capacity or the small scope to at least set our motivation on our future lives. At least do the work that's necessary to leave this life with what I like to call future life insurance. Making sure that when you get to the end of this life, you have everything planted within your mind so that you have seeds ripening to get you into a good rebirth. A rebirth as good as this one or even better. Imagine one where we were born with all the conditions to be able to meet Dharma at a very young age, to be able to start our practice, to actually make our whole life meaningful. Many of us met the Dharma at, midpoints in our lives or perhaps later. So it's nice to think about having all the conditions to be able to practice a very full life. The second part of that is the middle scope, or the person of middling capacity. And as you know, if you've been studying the Lam Rim, the stages of the path, that's where like the teachings on the Four Noble Truths are taught. Buddha's encapsulation of what our predicament is in the first two truths, that we are in a state of dukkha, or dissatisfaction, and that there's causes behind that. Those causes are within our own minds. They're not the situations outside of ourselves. They're not the people outside of ourselves that are our problem. It's all within our own minds, particularly our delusions that we're always trying to address. We spent some time this past weekend, confronting the delusions, trying to work with them, counteracting them. So that's the first two of the Four Noble Truths. The last two are speaking to what renunciation is aiming towards. So renunciation is turning away from samsara and all of its causes and everything involved in it, turning towards the end of our suffering, the third Noble Truth, that there can be a true cessation of all of our suffering, all our dukkha, all our dissatisfaction, a complete removal of everything that causes our suffering. And that can be accomplished through the true path, which the mind of renunciation, bodhicitta, emptiness, these are all encapsulating, our path. So again, this is where we turn away from future lies even and turn towards liberation. So the verse that we were ending on, we didn't go into a lot of commentary on this, but I did read a few passages. It's at the top of page 2. And you'll see that for each of these, there's kind of a definition provided of when do we really have that mind? Kind of what's your target? Your target is, let's read verse 5 together and then we'll talk about it a little bit. When, by having trained in that way, there is no arising even for a second of attraction to the perfections of cyclic existence, and all day and night the intention seeking liberation arises, then the thought of renunciation has been generated. So is anyone there yet? Just kind of joking. I'm not there yet. We all have to work on developing this mind. So we see that the meditations of the small scope and the middle scope support that and help us to get to this place. But it's not enough just to have kind of our casual meditation on these. For all three of these realizations, to really attain them deeply, we need a very focused mind. In the long rim, at the later stages, is where we set out the techniques for developing meditative concentration, developing what is called calm abiding. Calm abiding is a mind where once we have fully cultivated, we can remain in meditation on any virtuous object for as long as we wish, remaining there single-pointedly, delving very deeply into that. And there's also an accompanying kind of physical and mental sort of pliancy is the word that they use, but it's a sort of serviceability of our mind and body, unlike anything we have now. So when we sit down to meditate, I'm assuming that you have a mind like mine, but when you sit down to meditate, it's very hard to keep the body in that posture. It's very hard to keep the mind focused. Well, you've got a serviceability of the mind and body that comes with that attainment of calm abiding. That is something we've never experienced, at least in this life, probably. Though they say, all the teachers I've had said we've had this many, many lifetimes. We just never did anything that meaningful with it. These meditative states are very powerful states of mind, but they're only a tool to be used to combine with renunciation, bodhicitta, meditation on emptiness, and so on. So this is the important thing, is to develop that meditative mind that allows you to bring the mind of renunciation into your awareness, so that, as it says there, all day and night the intention-seeking liberation arises. It's like you're never captivated by the pleasures of samsara at all, because you really are kind of almost looking at them, not quite disdainfully, but you're disenchanted. I mentioned this last week, right? This idea of disillusionment or disenchantment. You're not caught up in all the pretty little things of this existence. You don't really, again, it doesn't mean you don't have them in your life, but you're never drawn into them as if they're kind of going to provide you with some sort of lasting happiness, because we know that that's not so. So then we go on. Well, let me read just a few more things. I think I mentioned this passage, but I'm going to read this again, because I mentioned that some people may have a question as to, well, why do if I'm really on the Mahayana path, which is what is the primary teachings that all of this is encompassed in, and therefore I really just need to generate bodhicitta, because bodhicitta is what supports our path to Buddhahood. And that's the next one we're going to be examining tonight. So people may wonder, well, why do I need to generate renunciation? I touched on it a little bit already tonight with the meditations I led, but Babanka Rinpoche, in his commentary, this little book that I brought with me that I'm going to cite from occasionally, he says, this is a unique feature of this work, and there is a reason for it. Renunciation is the one special cause that brings you what we call great compassion. To get to this compassion, you must first find true thoughts of renunciation. Great compassion is a state of mind where you can absolutely no longer bear to see other beings tormented by the sufferings of life. There's no way you can achieve it as long as your concern about the way life torments you yourself is so feeble that it couldn't blow down a single upright hair. So if you don't have the strength of mind that's examined your own suffering and really seen it for what it is, your own situation, your own samsara, how could you generate the wish to free others from theirs? You have to really get it for yourself first. And then you can say, yes, because I know my own state of samsara, my own suffering, that I can clearly see how others are suffering. Then I can generate great compassion, which we're going to talk about tonight. This is really the seed of bodhicitta. He goes on to say, he quotes this little verse from Master Shantideva that I think I shared kind of a version of it last time. He says, if people like these have never before, even in the dreams they dream, felt such a wish just for themselves, then how can it come to them for others? So if we haven't really generated it for ourselves, how can we wish it for others? So then he says, thus we can say that renunciation and compassion are the same state of mind, just that one is developed by meditating on our own situation, and the other by meditating on others' situation. To develop this compassion, we must undertake to study and contemplate the steps on the path to Buddhahood, the Lam Rim. People like, wait 1 second, I jumped to, that great teaching of the gentle protector Tsongkhapa, and thus gradually train our minds. People like you and I see our feelings of desire and our other mental afflictions grow stronger day by day. The problem is that we have not even been able to train our minds in the paths for people of lesser and medium scopes of practice. So it's like and I had this experience myself when I first came to these teachings in this Mahayana tradition. I was very moved by the whole idea of compassion for other beings and like dedicating your life in that way, the bodhisattva ideal of being totally, putting oneself last, putting all other beings first, all this kind of stuff. And you can jump in at that end and think you don't have to even look at your own situation. But if you don't generate it for yourself, then chances are your own delusions and all your own crazy things in your life are not going to get under control. We have to begin to subdue our own minds. And then we have the ability to even think about, the possibility of helping others to subdue theirs. So one more thing I want to share on renunciation before we leave this topic and go on to bodhicitta for tonight, the main topic, is a little quote from Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo. I think most of you have heard of her. She's this wonderful nun in the Kagyu tradition who has spent many, many years in meditation. And there's a book written about her called Cave in the Snow. I think she spent like 12 years in this one particular cave, which is quite amazing. And would any of us be able to spend 12 days in the cave meditating, much less 12 years? And so she says, most people feel cozy enough in samsara. They do not really have the genuine aspiration to go beyond samsara, which is what we're talking here in renunciation. They just want samsara to be a little bit better. It is quite interesting that samsara became the name of a perfume. Does everyone remember that there was a perfume called samsara? It's like, entice you with it. And it is like that, she says. It seduces us into thinking that it is okay. Samsara is not so bad. It smells nice. The underlying motivation to go beyond samsara is very rare, even for people who go to Dharma centers. There are many people who learn to meditate and so forth, but with the underlying motive that they hope to make themselves feel better. And if it ends up making them feel worse, instead of realizing that this might be a good sign, they think there's something wrong with Dharma. We are always looking to make ourselves comfortable in the prison house. We might think that if we get the cell wall painted a pretty shade of pale green and put in a few pictures, it won't be a prison anymore. So she's just kind of warning us about the dangers of not really generating this mind. Because otherwise we just tend to continue to decorate samsara and think that it's okay. It's not such a bad place to be. What are you people all talking about? You know, this is great, this is paradise. And those bumper stickers that say life is good, I don't know if they have them on a lot of cars here, but I always want to go over them and say, you know, cross it out and put suffering instead. But, you know, people don't like getting that message. It's a hard message to take in, to recognize that this is dukkha, this is suffering. I mentioned last week my brother's difficulty in getting that, you know, getting that to really hit home. So I think we all struggle with it to some degree, but it does require some dedicated effort on the two first scopes of the Lamrim, the small scope and the middle scope, in order to cultivate that. And it's worthwhile just spending this life becoming familiar with that. If we can end up this life with at least renunciation, wow, pretty major. If we can do more than that, how wonderful. But I agree with her. I think it's really quite rare for us to have that. So take these teachings to heart as best as you can. And I'm kind of telling myself that by saying that. You know, I have to do the same thing, all of us in the room. So any final questions or comments on this first principle aspect? Okay, so let's go on then to the second principle aspect. So as you see in the headline that's in the one that's in the box there on page 2, this is the second principle aspect. You see that it's divided into 3 parts. Again, this is what's called a hierarchical outline. So 2b, B indicates it's the second topic within 2, which is the body of the teachings. Again, 2a was renunciation, the first principle aspect. And of course 2c will be the wisdom of emptiness, the correct view of that. We see that this is divided in a similar way to what we saw for renunciation. Verse 6 in 2b1 is the purpose of generating the mind of enlightenment, so we need to know why this is necessary for us to do this. May be self-evident to most of us in the room, but nonetheless, Lama Tsongkhapa is going to reiterate that. 2b2 is how to generate the mind of enlightenment, just like we saw some verses that were directed at how we generate renunciation. We see the same for the bodhicitta. This is a synonym for bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment or the awakening mind. It's got a lot of different ways that people talk about it. And then finally in 2b3, which actually it says there 8a, and I probably should have put in a footnote in this version. This is actually not in Lama Tsongkhapa's text. That's why it's indicated as 8a. This is what Lama Zopa Rinpoche, our spiritual director, added, and it comes from this little book. So I'll actually read the passage that this comes from in terms of what's the measure, the definition of having bodhicitta at the level that we have it as this realization that will help us to proceed going forward. Then we go on to, of course, the third principal aspect, which will begin either later tonight, depending on time, or we'll go into it next Tuesday. So let's read the first 6 together, and then we'll talk about that a bit. Even if renunciation has been developed, if it is not possessed by the mind of enlightenment, it does not become the cause of the perfect bliss of unsurpassed enlightenment. Therefore, the wise generate the supreme mind of enlightenment. So this is the idea that, yes, bodhisattvas do need to develop renunciation. Those who are inclined towards the Mahayana want to and have to develop that mind that sees their own suffering first. But if they don't ever cultivate bodhicitta, the intention to become fully enlightened for the sake of all beings, they will never accomplish the remaining of the Mahayana path all the way to enlightenment. So recall again that last week I set out the distinguishing facts between what we call liberation and enlightenment. If you have just the mind of renunciation, that is your fuel for going on to achieve liberation. And liberation is what's accomplished on what's called the Hinayana path, or the individual path, or what was the word that again? The individual vehicle, I guess, is the word that Robert Thurman uses. The idea here is that there are some people that do have that inclination, do have that predisposition. And the greatest burden that they can carry at that point in time is just their own happiness, their own well-being, their own freedom from suffering. It's not that they don't have compassion for other beings, they just simply cannot sign up for the whole Mahayana path. So the Buddha taught this path that includes 2 types of practitioners. Last week we went through these briefly, the hearers, or shravakas as they're called in Sanskrit, and then the solitary realizers, or Pratyeka Buddhas. So there's two different types of individuals who will practice that path, and they have the same goal in essence, which is to get to what we call an arhat, or a foe destroyer, to attain their own personal nirvana, to abide in the solitary peace that comes when you've removed all of the afflictions, all the delusions, all the stuff we were talking about this weekend. That is, all the distorted states of mind, down especially to the root of ignorance, that is not knowing things correctly. They remove all of that, the seeds of all of that, and they no longer have any empowerment of their karma by virtue of that, and so they never take rebirth again in samsara through the force of their karma and delusions. When they leave that life in which they attain arhatship, they pass away from this life, what's called a parinirvana, and they abide in a mental state, in this state of solitary peace, for a long, long, long time. Then eventually they're pulled by the Buddhas back onto the path and enter the Mahayana. So there are many, though, who have the predisposition to enter the Mahayana right from the beginning. Those people who come from the Hinayana path as arhats will still have to go through all of the Mahayana path. They will have already removed their afflictive obscurations. But what they still have in their minds that obscures their minds from achieving Buddhahood is what's called the knowledge obscurations, the obscurations to omniscience. So in order to achieve the complete removal of the obscurations to omniscience, to be able to become a Buddha, a fully omniscient being, you have to achieve bodhicitta. You have to have bodhicitta. You cannot do it with simply renunciation. And with that mind of bodhicitta, that allows you to collect a greater amount of merit, a storehouse of positive potential. You unite that with your wisdom, realizing emptiness, and you are able to remove first the afflictive obscurations that the Hinayanas remove on their path, and then you go on to remove the knowledge obscurations, the obscurations to omniscience, which are the very subtle imprints in our minds that cause a dualistic appearance. They cause things to appear to us as if they exist on their own, even though we've removed the ignorance that thinks that they exist on their own. Again, we're going to talk about that next time when we get to the third principal aspect. But the idea here is that you absolutely have to combine this mind of renunciation, that is the gateway to the Hinayana path. The Bodhisattva precedes their entrance to the Mahayana path with developing that mind, but then absolutely has to cultivate bodhicitta in order to enter the Mahayana path, in order to strive to become a Buddha and accomplish that goal of removing everything that obscures the mind. When you remove everything that obscures the mind, the state of your mind, which is naturally there, manifests completely in the form of omniscience, imbued with great compassion for all beings, great love for all beings. This wisdom and compassion united in that state of mind that's called the Dharmakaya, this wisdom mind of a Buddha, then manifests in forms for the sake of beings, to help those beings on their path. So this is the goal that we are setting ourselves, towards by generating the main mind that allows us to practice the third level of the stages of the path, the great level. So last time and earlier this evening we talked about the small scope, the middle scope. Bodhicitta is the entrance to the great scope. It's the first teaching that is taught in the great scope. How we need to cultivate this very powerful mind that acts as kind of the fuel that helps us to get all the way to enlightenment, because it's setting our sights on that goal. Again, I talked a bit last week about how we all have the potential for that, right? That we all have Buddha nature. Even in prior times I was here, I taught on Buddha nature. Some of you were at those teachings. Essentially what that means is every one of us has a fundamentally pure mind that is the basis for being able to remove all these adventitious purities. Because your mind is fundamentally pure, everything that pollutes the mind can be taken out. And the natural purity of the mind can kind of manifest in that full form of omniscience. So this is the logic for why we need to cultivate bodhicitta, is because we need to do that deeper work that gets us to omniscience, that gets us to complete enlightenment. So once we accompany our mind of renunciation with bodhicitta, then we enter into the Mahayana path. And of course we're going to see in that verse 8a, what the real kind of criteria are for when you have that mind at that level that allows you to enter the path. So I think most of you have also the little handout that is there, that the second one-sheet handout. If you're not, they're on the table there. That gives the techniques for generating bodhicitta. You may wonder, well, why am I going to talk about that when Lama Tsongkhapa is going to tell us in 2b2 in verses 7 and 8 how to generate the mind of enlightenment? Well, Lama Tsongkhapa there focuses primarily on this idea of great compassion and an understanding of the situation of others, which is the seed of bodhicitta. What I thought I would do tonight before we go through the verses is just talk about these briefly. I don't have the time, obviously, to go into all of this, and I'm sure Venerable Tendren in her teachings has gone through the techniques. This is a very common teaching. What I put there on the sheet are the two main techniques that are generally taught in this tradition. The 7-point cause and effect instruction is, it's again a name that is used in some cases. Sometimes you'll see even variations on that name. But the second technique is the instruction on equalizing and exchanging self with others. The third one is an interesting one because it combines in 11 steps everything that precedes that, everything in 1 and 2, as well as the preliminary step of developing equanimity that's at the very top of the page. So what I'd like to do to go through these is maybe I'll just go through the 11-step method, and then you can see, because pretty much everything that's in the 11-step method is mirrored in what's in the 7-point cause and effect and in the instruction on equalizing and exchanging self with others. So if you go down to number 3, the first point, it says developing equanimity. Equanimity is this mind that has an equal regard for all beings. Right now we have a lot of bias towards various beings. The beings who are friends, we feel a great attachment towards. The beings who are strangers, we feel a great indifference towards. The beings who are difficult for us, we have a lot of animosity towards, and a lot of, even hatred perhaps, but certainly a lot of negative feelings towards. So we want to just recognize that these states of mind, of attachment, indifference, and hatred or aversion, these minds are problematic. They don't allow us to have an equal regard for all beings. So we need to kind of make equanimity with regard to those minds. We don't change the beings themselves. I mean, some people will still be your enemies. They're still going to do things that harm you. Some people will be strangers. We can't know everybody in this world. And we have the people who are our friends, who continue to play that role perhaps. But the idea here is that we need to have a different mind that is not getting caught up in these deluded ways of relating to those three groups. So again, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about each of these, at least just a couple of sentences so you have some idea. And you can go back to some of the teachings in the Lam Rim and the stages of the path to provide additional information. So steps numbers 3, 4, and 5, 2, 3, and 4 all come from the top, these 7-point cause and effect. They are the first 3 of the 7-point cause and effect. That technique of the 7-point cause and effect, this is the main gist of it, is that we need to not only kind of understand beings as suffering, but primarily we need to get rid of this feeling that we're not having a kind of an affection for and a connection to, and a feeling some closeness towards beings. So what we're doing in these 3 steps is we're going to recollect by an analysis that should make sense if we understand that mind is beginningless, that every single being has been one's mother, perceiving all beings having played that role. And they use mother because the mother is a very important person in the lives of those of us in human form particularly, but also we see it in the animal realm, that the mother plays a key role in terms of bringing the child to term, caring generally for the young offspring when they're very vulnerable, making sure that they're taken care of and protected from danger and so on. Not to say that other beings don't play that role, and there are even certainly sometimes when mothers don't play that role very much at all. This does happen in our world, but nonetheless, when we think about beings as having been one's mother, it's based on the fact that we've had beginningless lives. Since there's no beginning to our lives in samsara, anytime we were born from a womb or from an egg, we needed a mother to play that role for us, of bringing us to term, helping us to have this life, caring for us frequently after birth, and so on. So we're going to use that logic to see every single being as having been our mother. And not just once, but many, many times, because we've had countless rebirths. So it's a bit mind-boggling. They say this is one of the hardest realizations to get, next to the one I mentioned last week of seeing the Guru as a Buddha. Those are the two hardest, Pavanka Rinpoche says, to actually realize. That's the second step in our 11-step method, which again is the first of the sevenfold cause and effect at the top of the page. The second thing is then, thinking they played that role, remember the kindness that they showed us. You know, it's incredible to really think about. We were there, but we don't have a strong recollection. At least I don't recollect my mother caring for me, in those younger years. My earliest memories are like 3.5, 4 years old, and I think that's pretty average for people. Some may have memories earlier than that. But nonetheless, we know that she did many, many things to care for us. If your mother wasn't there in that role, then you don't really necessarily have that person to look to and attribute that to, but somebody cared for you. Absolutely. You wouldn't be here if somebody didn't keep you clean and feed you and do all the things that needed to be done, right? So that's where we remember all that kind of kindness that these beings must have shown us in that role. And then the step number 4 is a natural kind of outcropping of that on the basis of having reflected on all beings in that role, thinking about them being incredibly kind. We want to reciprocate. We want to repay that kindness. This is natural in our world, right? If somebody does a kindness to you, you want to repay that kindness in some way. And it's even frowned upon in society at large if you don't do that. There's kind of, not that there should be an expectation, I'm just saying that this is something that should feel quite natural. When we begin to think about how we've benefited from other people's kindness, we should naturally want to repay it. So those are the first 3 that are taken from the 7-point cause and effect. Now, if we jump up to that one, we'll see that the next 4 and 5 there are all about generating great love and great compassion. Well, those are mirrored in what we're going to look at as we continue, because there's a unique technique that is taught in the other method that helps us to generate love and compassion, and that's the practice of Tonglen that many of you know of. So we go on then to step number 5 on your list. The 11-step combined method says equalizing oneself and others. So equalizing oneself and others is the first step of instruction number 2. So we're kind of combining those. After having thought about beings all as our mothers and wanting to repay their immeasurable kindness, we now start to think about ourselves and others as being equal, at least equal. We start there. Now, how are we all equal? We're equal in that every one of these beings that we were thinking about as our kind mother sentient beings is exactly the same as us in terms of wanting to be happy, wanting to not suffer, and not having real happiness, and not having freedom from suffering. So we're all in the same boat, in the same predicament. There's no difference between any of us. This is the first step to kind of put us all at least on a level playing field. Then we come to work with the techniques that help us to exchange self and others. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean, I'm going to move into where Arlene lives, and Arlene's going to take my life and go traveling around and teaching, and I'm going to exchange myself for another? No, this means that I'm going to exchange my normal, habitual way of thinking, I'm most important, I'm the center of the universe, to saying others are the center of the universe, others are most important. I have to replace, exchange the way I currently focus on myself in that very selfish, self-centered way with an other-focused way, putting others first, thinking of them first. This is, of course, where compassion and love are really rooted in the idea that our own needs need to be relegated to, a lesser importance, that we need to be focused on the well-being of others. But to understand that throughout this whole technique that we're doing what His Holiness calls being wisely selfish. That this is actually how we accomplish our greatest welfare, is by being dedicated to the welfare of others. And I'll share a few quotes that help us to kind of understand that as well, in terms of personal responsibility and why we need to do that. How our own fulfillment is met by actually being dedicated to the welfare of others. So the second step in equalizing and exchanging self and others, as well as the third, are mirrored in the 6th and the 7th, in terms of contemplating the shortcomings of continuing to follow this mind that we call self-cherishing or self-centeredness. And self-cherishing some people don't really like that term cherishing, because at some level we're never negating, as I mentioned a couple of times in my stay here, we're never negating this fundamental drive that we all have, which is to be happy and to not suffer. Never getting rid of that, because that's the whole driving force of everything the Buddha taught. That's the whole driving force, I think, of every spiritual tradition, is really to deal with, in whatever way they teach, how to remedy our situation in terms of our suffering, how to find true peace and happiness. But what we're trying to do here again is to overcome the ways in which we've tried to seek happiness by being focused on ourselves, by being self-centered, by being self-preoccupied. So we have to think about the shortcomings of that. As Master Shantideva says, all the suffering there is in the world comes from wanting happiness for oneself alone. So how does that happen? Well, karmically we see that we create negative actions when we're solely focused on ourselves. When we think about ourselves as most important, we neglect others. We don't think it's any big deal to steal from them, to lie to them, to do all the things that harm them. So when you harm others through your own selfish mind, you create the causes for your own suffering, as well as, of course, the suffering of those beings that you torment through your self-centered mind. On the other hand, Master Shantideva says in relation to number 7 there, the advantages of cherishing others, he says all the good there is in the world comes from holding others dear, comes from cherishing other beings. This is because, once more, karmically we see that that's the case. If instead of me harming others through this mind of self-centeredness, that it's all me first and to hell with everybody else, instead I go forward with a mind that wants them to be first, wants them to be taken care of, that sacrifices my own resources for their sake, gladly gives them what they need, gladly helps them out through using my time and other resources, that is dedicated to not harming them because we hold them very dear. Then we get all the positive results. Karmically we get all the good stuff, That's not why we should be doing it. Oh, I'm going to do all these wonderful acts so I can benefit. We do them because it's good to do that. It's good to benefit others. And by the way, you are benefited in doing that. So in this way, the mind that cherishes others is the source of all happiness. Because all good karma arises together with a mind that is not thinking about oneself, but is rather focused on the well-being of others. Did you have a question, Jack? I wasn't sure.
There's a sort of. It
Okay.
kind of goes back and forth, but it seems like this search for this struggle towards enlightenment is a form of self-centeredness or cherishing. This is what you're.
In what way would you say?
Well, that's ultimate happiness for oneself.
Right. But it's not the self. Yeah, if we just use self-cherishing to mean that mind that wants to be happy and doesn't want to suffer, yes. If we call it this distorted state of mind, that's what we're trying to address here, that we might, sometimes we use terms like self-centeredness or self-preoccupation, where it becomes all about us. And then we are blind to the welfare of others. Then we're never going to achieve enlightenment. We're never going to achieve our ultimate goal. So you're right. If we are able to simply recognize that we do want to be happy, we don't want to suffer, the best way to solve that problem is to become enlightened for the sake of all beings. To be dedicated to their welfare will get us to our ultimate happiness. Is that what you were kind of alluding to in that?
I guess so.
Okay.
Seems counterintuitive.
Well, sure. This is why we're so blinded by this mind of self-centeredness. We think that if we follow these drives we have that are all about us, which is what we're doing for a good part of our day, that somehow we're going to be satisfied. But along the way, we create a lot of negative karma. We create a lot of delusion because we get more and more attached to just meeting our own needs and to having the things that we have in our lives and being blind to the reality that we could be using all those things to benefit others. Or at least things that we have when we partake of them, to use them with that motivation. We're going to talk about this a little bit tonight if we've got time, is to really understand that we can do a lot of our actions with bodhicitta. So when we sit down to eat, we can eat with bodhicitta. This is what Rinpoche encourages us to do. Because as I said in this course, I do want to make it quite practical for us too, in terms of, it's called making our lives meaningful. So how do we make every moment of our life meaningful? With renunciation, it's seeing things as they are in terms of understanding that we're in a whole lot of dukkha here, you know. We're stepping in dukkha every day, you know, and dukkha on our shoes. And just to get that. But then, while we're partaking of all that stuff, because you're still going to continue to eat and do the things that you do, then you want to overlay this mind of bodhicitta, and that can help you to transform all your actions into very, very powerful causes for enlightenment. But we have to get past our self-centeredness. If we just are on autopilot thinking it's all about me, from the time we get up to the time we go to bed, are we going to be so other-focused? Are we going to do what's best to benefit other beings? And our practice of bodhicitta is going to be kind of silly because we're not living our lives really dedicated to others. And if we are dedicated to others, it's the best way to achieve your own welfare. As His Holiness says, that's what it means to be wisely selfish. You know, if you're going to be selfish, at least be wisely selfish. And He's not saying be selfish in terms of, obviously, the more that we are other-focused, the less we are self-focused. And replace those two. Again, that's what this whole technique is exchanging self with others. You know, putting them first. So that's those two steps. And there's many, by the way, the book called Bodhisattva Attitude, which I think you guys do have out on the free shelf or whatever, the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive books. There's a whole meditation on all the other disadvantages that you can think about, all the various ways that this mind of self-cherishing causes you unbelievable suffering. You really want to get to feel like it's the enemy, it's the real problem in our lives. Because we're just on autopilot, going after that stuff with that selfish mind all day. And then you want to replace it with the mind that has great benefit of cherishing other beings. Again, we've already generated a compassionate wish towards ourselves through renunciation. So here, we're not denying that you want to be free from suffering and you want to be out of samsara yourself. It's just saying, yes, and everybody else does too. So how do I achieve the best welfare for everyone? By stopping all this self-centered craziness and beginning to move towards cherishing others, holding them dear. So then, there's usually another step that comes in the equalizing and exchanging self and others in those steps, and that's the actual thought to do that. That one is left out of this 11th step, but it's essentially just saying, well, then you have to make the determination to do that. It's kind of like if you have real conviction that there's only benefits to doing this and there's only detriment to doing that, well, then you say, okay, then I'm going to do this and stop doing that. I'm going to practice that path of exchanging self and others. And the most powerful technique for doing that is steps 8 and 9, taking and giving, Tong Len. Tong is actually giving and Len is taking. This is two Tibetan words, but they're practiced in the order of taking away the suffering of others and giving them your happiness. So there's lots of instruction on Tong Len that I could give. It's good to maybe, poke around and see what's all out there. I may have mentioned, I don't know, maybe this was up in Raleigh when I mentioned, it's actually good. One of the best set of teachings, it's very concise, is River Rinpoche's How to Generate Bodhicitta, which is actually part of the Discovering Buddhism materials for Module 10. And if you need any help in finding that, maybe talk to Nicole or myself. But River Rinpoche talks about both these techniques and a bit on combining them, but he gives some really wonderful instruction on each of these. So in the taking part of it, what you're trying to do, and you can start with yourself. Again, work on compassion for yourself and love for yourself first. But when you begin to feel ready for working on others, you visualize somebody in front of you and start with one being, maybe that being you're quite close to. But you begin to think about their suffering, how they're going through difficulties, how they are under the control of their karma and delusions, all the things that you understand about their suffering, and generate compassionate thoughts towards them, wanting to remove their suffering. And then in our tradition, you always visualize the self-cherishing mind, the self-centered mind that we just talked about. That's the enemy, that's the real problem. It's kind of a dense, hard object at the center of our chest. It can be a rock or some dense mass, whatever your black object, whatever is kind of like something that you want to get rid of. It just feels very heavy inside of you. Then you bring in all of that suffering, and you can use the breath to do this. And they say you can bring it in the form of black smoke. this kind of thick, hot, black smoke. It's almost like there was one time when I was a small, like electrical fire, and where I was staying, and it was like, you go, oh, that's what it's kind of like, because electrical smoke is really nasty. It's not something you really want. It should feel unpleasant to visualize that you're breathing in that smoke. You bring it down to your heart center and you let it destroy this mind of self-cherishing. And I like to encourage people to do that in a very gradual way. Not like, you breathe it all in and boom, it all goes. But rather bring it in and it kind of eats away a bit of it. And then you bring in more and it eats away a bit more. And eventually you get to a place where you remove all of that. So you've done that step number 8 there, which is the taking the suffering of others on oneself. Then, from the space of that mind that now is free of self-cherishing, you generate the mind that cherishes others. Lama Zopa Rinpoche says you could visualize your whole body as like a wish-fulfilling jewel, this mythical jewel that is there that can relieve all the needs of others, give them exactly what they desire and need in their lives. I sometimes like to visualize just a jewel at my heart, because this is where I got rid of the mind of self-cherishing, so I think I've got this sort of jewel there. But the idea is that you sort of have that jewel imbued with light that represents everything good you have in your life, that you're now going to give away happily to others. And you can do that on the out-breath. Send that out so that others receive it. So the person in front of you that you're working with, if you're doing a meditation on just one person, receives that, and it instantly becomes everything that they need to bring them temporal happiness and eventually to bring them ultimate happiness. And you just keep sending that out until you send it all out, they receive it, and they attain the perfect bliss of Buddhahood, the completion of their welfare. Anyway, this is one version of it. As I said, there's many different versions of Tonglen. And you can find what works for you, and you can use visualizations that work for you. The most important thing is to generate that compassionate wish that wants to remove the suffering of others, and the love that wants to benefit them by giving away what we have, make them happy. Now, what makes those two, great compassion and great love, is the fact that they're not just about wanting others to have those things, be free from suffering and have happiness. It's you becoming the agent of that. You saying, I'll take responsibility for that. And that's already embodied in this mind of Tonglen, because you're willingly taking their suffering. You're happily giving them all your happiness. Everything that brings you happiness. But then we usually accompany both techniques, have these last two. Number 10 there is developing this pure superior altruistic intention, which is the idea that even if it is by myself alone, I will do this for every single sentient being. I will free them from suffering. I will place them in happiness. Of course, with the understanding that you can't actually place them in happiness and free them from suffering yourself alone. I mean, it still requires an active engagement from the side of the beings. Just like, we're still sitting here in samsara. If the Buddhas could place us in happiness and free us from suffering, they'd have done it a long time ago. How do they do that? By teaching the Dharma, by being in their lives in ways that they benefit beings. When they become a Buddha, as I mentioned earlier, they then have the ability to manifest in the lives of beings like ourselves. So, the idea here is when you generate step 10 there, the pure superior altruistic intention, it's imbued with that thought that you will benefit all beings when you attain that state. Or that you will benefit all beings by yourself alone if needed. And this naturally leads to the question, well, how do I do that? And you see that you have to attain enlightenment to accomplish that. That leads you to bodhicitta. It's kind of like, again, the acknowledgement that you cannot benefit beings to that degree until you become a Buddha. You should benefit them as much as possible now, but recognize that you're limited in what you can do for others. I wanted to share one little passage, well, the one thing in regard to this personal responsibility, this whole idea of why we take this level of responsibility that's in Pabanka Rinpoche's text. And he said, some people might come up with the idea that, why should I take upon myself this great load of every living being? There are plenty of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas around to guide them on their way. This kind of thought is absolutely improper. It's base. It's shameless. It's as if your mother in this life was hungry and parched, and you expected someone else's child to go and give her food and drink. but it's you for whom she has cared, and the responsibility of paying her back has fallen only to you. It's the same with all these living beings, who for beginningless time have served as my mother so many times, and who in each of these times cared for me in every way with the kindness of this present mother. Returning their kindness is no business of anyone else at all, not for some Buddha or Bodhisattva. It is my responsibility, and only mine. I mean, it's pretty strong thought behind it. I mean, we're not denying that there are other Buddhas out there that are dedicated to the welfare of all beings, because this is the whole point. You become a Buddha, you kind of join the ranks of the enlightened beings, and you continue to do everything to benefit others. But it's saying we have to have that level of responsibility. I found it kind of interesting, one passage I came across many years ago that I'm going to share as well, that comes from His Holiness's book, Path to Bliss. I don't know how many of you have read that. It's a nice long-run book. And he says here, you might feel that since fulfilling the wishes of other sentient beings and bringing about their welfare basically depends on their taking the initiative themselves, then what particular need is there for you to work for the achievement of enlightenment? After all, there are many Buddhas who will be able to help sentient beings immediately if these beings take the initiative. So it's a bit of a similar thought, but His Holiness has a slightly different answer, which I thought is worth sharing. You know, so if you think, well, oh, there's plenty of Buddhas out there doing the work, why do they need another Buddha? You know, Buddhas they're not, we would never use the word omnipotent, but nonetheless, a Buddha can do anything from their side to benefit others if sentient beings take the initiative, if there's some doorway in, if the karma is right for sentient beings to be benefited. So His Holiness says, however, the benefit from particular spiritual guides or teachers depends upon the recipient having karmic links with these beings. Therefore, I don't know what I wrote here. Thus, some spiritual teachers can be most effective and beneficial to only a certain number of disciples, and not to other beings. In order to understand this, it is helpful to read the sutras, such as the Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 lines, in which the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, having seen that a certain practitioner had a stronger karmic link with another spiritual teacher, advised him to seek his own spiritual master. There will be sentient beings who may be able to see a Buddha directly, but who may not benefit as much from that as they would from interaction with you, due to their having a deeper karmic link with you. Since life is beginningless in this cycle of existence, you can speak of beginningless karmic links. However, what I am concerned with and referring to here, he says, is a strong karmic link between individuals formed in recent lives. So then he goes on, the crux of what he says is, although your achievement of the omniscient state may not be beneficial to all sentient beings, it will definitely bring a lot of practical benefit to certain living beings. Therefore, it is very important that you work for your own achievement of the completely enlightened state, because there might be living beings who depend very much upon your guidance on the spiritual path. It is important that you take upon yourself the responsibility to work for the benefit of others. By thinking in such terms, you will be able to develop the strong belief that without attaining the omniscient state, you will not be able to fulfill what you set out to do and truly benefit others. So he makes this kind of point, which I've never heard any other teacher say this, but essentially saying that your own individual enlightenment is still important. Whether you think there are countless other Buddhas out there or whatever, why is it important? In particular, because of those beings that you have a strong karmic link with. I mean, I think about my own kind of close people in my life. I managed to get my mother to go to see the Dalai Lama when he was in Indianapolis in 1999, and she sat in the audience, but you know, she goes, oh, I didn't really understand much of what he said, but he seemed like a nice guy. So she's got a stronger karmic link with me, you know. I'm not trying to get on my own little kind of self-promotion thing here with any of this, but this is kind of how I analyze these teachings, is say, and I have heard some of my teachers say that there are beings whose enlightenment depends upon you. And I think that's what His Holiness is kind of targeting here by saying, certain beings you have a very close karma with. And because of that karmic connection, you will be their lifeline. You will be the person who will be able to bring them into achieving their enlightenment. Not that, again, we're into proselytizing and all this stuff. It's, you know, why I took my mother to see the Dalai Lama is I thought it would be nice for her to have that experience. I wasn't trying to make her Buddhist or anything. and she's not Buddhist. But you know, the fact that I'm karmically connected with her means that I've got an in with her. I've got something there that will keep us, at least if I were to get enlightened in this lifetime or even my next life, keeps us very close karmically. Because when you achieve enlightenment, the beings who are in your closest circle end up being kind of in your retinue, the people that you will benefit most directly. Look at the Buddha himself. We celebrated his first teaching yesterday. And his very first teaching were the 5 ascetics that he practiced with for years. And those 5 also showed up in other lifetimes. If you read, like in the Golden Light Sutra, they were the 5 tiger cubs that were the offspring of the tigress who was starving, who the Buddha, as the Bodhisattva prince, fed the tigress with his own body so that she could sustain the life of those 5 cubs. Those 5 cubs became the 5 disciples. Those are the beings that you have a very strong karmic connection with through very profound actions or through proximity, because you're enlightened very close to, you know, when you have that connection with them. They will benefit the most. Yes, you'll benefit all beings in a real general way because you become part of that energy in the world that is determined to enlighten others. But there are beings, as these other teachers I've had said, you know, whose enlightenment may depend upon you. So I think it's very inspiring. I mean, some people, you know, because then you can put faces and ideas to it and say, you know, why do I want to become enlightened? Because of all the beings that I am making karmic connections with. Because those beings, some of them may absolutely need me to be enlightened in order to accomplish that. So it does put a little more responsibility on us, but that helps us to kind of feed all of this. So any questions on this on these techniques or on bodhicitta before we actually look at what Tsongkhapa says? Yeah, Tracy.
A simple way to remember renunciation in simple words is that just not being attached to to participate in life but not have an attachment to it. That's how you should think of renunciation?
And again, we can use different words. I mean, certainly to not be attached to this life or future lives or to any of samsara. To turn away from samsara and to turn towards liberation. Okay. Again, I sometimes like these words like disillusionment or disenchantment with samsara, to kind of live one's life without being kind of enthralled with all of the things life has to offer. As I mentioned, we're going to touch on the 3 sufferings again tonight, but we have no problem turning away from the first level of suffering, suffering of pain and mental anguish and all that. Who wants it? You know, thank you very much. I will gladly leave that behind. Where we have the most difficulty is the pleasures of samsara. That's why that verse even said, you know, what was it again with, there is no attraction, no rising even for a second of attraction to the perfections of psychic existence. Well, there's no real perfections in psychic existence. What we mean by that are the things that seem to be perfect in samsara. The things that really entice us into thinking, as Venerable Jitsuma, Tenzin Palmo says, that, you know, we're just in a paradise, when we're really, all we've done is decorate our prison cell. So that's the idea behind it. The main thing we have to turn away from is this intoxication with the pleasures of samsara. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, but I can still participate, just know that it's...
I mean, yes,
I'm not talking about going out and partying and what other things
right.
that we
and shopping all day and acquiring things and all this. Yeah,
yes.
I mean, you know, obviously that's when the mind of attachment, we can see it quite obviously, it's going on. But yes, we will have things in our life, you know, that will still bring pleasure. But we see them for what they are. We don't get enthralled by them. We don't get caught up in them.
And now for the next question is this technique of generating bodhicitta.
Uh-huh.
You want to be able to help others, but if I'm still struggling, and I can only talk for myself, with my negative states of mind,
right?
Am I capable of helping others? So I'm kind of a little confused. Is this something that like tunneling I can do now? I can see that. This talks about helping others and cherishing others. Mm-hmm. Is that just a mental process or doing action?
It's both.
Okay.
You know, the strength of our mind of bodhicitta is very important to develop. So to develop it on the cushion is a good part of it. But when we're off the cushion, it should be infused in what we do. it's kind of like if we meditate on generosity, if we sit there and go, oh, how wonderful it is to give, and the karma of giving, and then we get up off our cushion, we go downtown, and there's a guy asking for $1 or something, and we're like, no, get out of here, what are you talking about? I'm not going to give you any money. It's like, well then, your meditation on generosity isn't going anywhere if it doesn't manifest in actual giving. You know, maybe we give with some discrimination, but nonetheless we give. We have a mind that wants to give, and even if we can't give the physical resources, if we don't have the dollar, or if we don't think the dollar is the right thing, we find something appropriate to give. Even if we say kind things to that person and give them our love, our attention in that way. You know, find something that is a spark of generosity that we practice. If instead we just tighten up every time we're out there, well then we need to make sure that what we meditate on the cushion is manifesting when we're off the cushion. Yeah, Brian?
Don, how do you mitigate giving to others and being selfless, but also, or maybe not, maybe there could be the other extreme where,
Right.
you know, people who give and give and give and give everything to
Right.
everyone and seemingly don't treat themselves well at all.
Right. You bring up an interesting point, Brian. This whole balance between taking care of oneself and taking care of others. Well, there's different answers for this. One teacher, for example, I had said if you really had conviction in the law of karma, you would give everything away because you would know in your heart, not believe, but know in your heart that it's all coming back to you. You wouldn't have that hesitation at all. Well, most of us aren't there, so, but even if we look at this mind of bodhicitta, what are we talking about with bodhicitta? We have to take care of ourselves in order to benefit others. We have to make sure that we're doing what we can to develop ourselves in order to be able to benefit others. So I have no problem kind of overlaying that to this whole idea of even how we deal with our own physical lives, and to keep extending how far we can go with generosity or other actions of kindness and charity towards others. But to recognize that we do have to take care of ourselves in the midst of that. But people will find at different stages of their development that there's different answers to that question. Don't think of it as fixed, but rather an evolution. Because I just told you briefly the story of the Bodhisattva prince who became the Buddha, who was happy to give his body to a tigress who was starving. Sorry, I'm not there yet, and I don't think most of us are. We're not ready. In Santa Fe there are occasionally mountain lions and stuff. If I was walking in the mountains and I came across a mountain lion who was starving and had just given birth to 5 cubs, I might try to run down to Whole Foods and get some meat or something. I don't think I'd be cutting open my own neck and saying, here, have at it. I'm just being honest. So there are times when giving away everything will feel quite natural. And in the Bodhisattva Prince, he was like, this is what I was waiting for. This is what I've been making prayers for, is to be able to give my body in this way. This is like the perfect opportunity. And did it joyfully, with great delight, no regrets. Well, then he was ready to give at that level. Most of us would have great regrets to give our body up for the well-being of an animal. So the answer is going to change over time. I think we need to be attentive, and I have read some lamas and some teachings where they simply say, yes, be very careful to take care of yourself in the midst of your own giving and your own extending yourself to others, because then you may end up generating great regret if you give everything away and you don't really have that level of conviction or comfort with doing that. It's fine. Just keep pushing the envelope, testing what it's like to give a little bit more. Because if we have faith in karma, karma is a difficult teaching to have absolute conviction in. But if we have faith in many of the other Buddha's teachings, our own conviction through having investigated them, we can say, well, the Buddha's a reliable guide then. He's somebody who's giving us good knowledge. The Buddha says that if you practice generosity, you receive resources, that things will come into your life. So just have some conviction that that's the underlying thing that we're relying upon, but we're just trying to keep developing our heart, to extend our heart a little more, a little more, a little more. Not become complacent and think, oh, I found where I'm at, and now I'm just going to hang out here. So there's no real set answer to that. It really depends on our own individual situation and practice. Master Shantideva, in his text, he was living in the monastery. He didn't have any wealth at all. He didn't have anything to give. And so he talks about just, giving love and kindness to others and doing what you can. You can visualize giving, just have a strong intention to give. We're never talking about perfecting our giving on the outside anyway. It's a part of it, it's a manifestation of it. But you can never get rid of all the beings who need things that you would be using as objects of your giving. Even Jesus Christ said this, right? There will be poor always. There will always be people and other beings who need resources. So our generosity isn't perfected when all those people have everything that they need physically. Our generosity is perfected when in our own hearts and minds we are imbued with that intention to give. And material things are only one part of our giving. The best way we can give is to give the Dharma to others. This is what Buddhahood is essentially, is being able to give the Dharma perfectly to others. So we can share the Dharma with others when it's appropriate. Again, we're not into proselytizing. We don't go door to door with little Buddha or little Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive books and say, I'd like to talk to you about the Buddha today. Do you have a few minutes? This just isn't what we do. But if you have people in your life who are close to you and they're having some problems or difficulties and you've heard things in your Buddhist teachings that you think might be useful, then out of your generosity, offer that to them. Say, well, I have some teachings or some ideas that I've come across that I think might be useful. Would you like to hear that? And if somebody says, yeah, that might be useful, then you tell them, and then they go, yes, no, whatever they say. And you're happy that you shared it. Whether they use it or not, it's up to them. So there's lots of ways to give. So don't think that, we have to necessarily just do the one. So how do we get on giving? I'm sorry. We made a little circuitous thing here, but
I was
yes.
going to say part of the giving, and the word hasn't come in, but it must be the process of forgiveness as well.
Yeah.
Giving is forgiving the negative behaviors of others.
Yeah, extending our forgiveness to others is a form of giving. All of these things, love, compassion, any positive qualities that we have that we can extend to others, I think are also important. But forgiveness, so that's a whole other topic, and we could go into all the intricacies of that, because we also have to be very comfortable with that forgiveness and what that means. But yes, I agree with you.
You were talking about bodhicitta.
Bodhicitta, yeah.
I think the generosity is like the first part of that.
Yeah. But somehow we got a little bit off, but that's okay. Can we go on? Or is there other questions? Okay, let's go ahead then and move on into verses 7 and 8. So let's read both of these verses, and then I'll just go through in a somewhat abbreviated way. I want to make sure I comment on all of this so that you know what the for is of this and what have you. So let's read those verses now. Swept away by the current of the 4 powerful rivers, tied by the taut bonds of karma, so hard to undo, caught in the iron net of self-grasping, completely enveloped by the total darkness of ignorance, endlessly reborn in cyclic existence, ceaselessly tormented by the 3 sufferings, thinking that all mothers are in such a condition, generate the supreme mind of enlightenment. I remember how we got off on that. Tracy had asked about, does it mean that you can benefit others now or just work on developing the mind that, wants to cherish them? So I was talking about this balance, that you need to have both involved. So you'll see that kind of what 7 and 8 are talking about is sort of how we need to examine beings in terms of really understanding their predicament, really getting what it is that they're going through. Now we have already examined it for ourselves. And that was what renunciation was about. So it's kind of interesting that Tsongkhapa chooses to kind of focus on this in such a detailed way about what sentient beings are enduring. But it's interesting, His Holiness the Dalai Lama in some of his teachings, he emphasizes how to have great compassion for beings. We have 2 things that we need. One is something we just talked about when we went through the techniques, which was that idea of feeling close to them. That's why we think about them having been our mothers, because then we feel some affinity towards them. We feel like there's some heart connection to other beings. So that's an important quality, that sort of empathy that is able to be with others from that heart space. But we have to very clearly understand their suffering too. And that's why I think Tsongkhapa spends a lot of time reinforcing our compassion by really getting the ways that sentient beings are suffering in such an intricate way. So this is that side of it, because as His Holiness says, to have compassion, you must have the awareness of the suffering of sentient beings along with that feeling of closeness towards them. So the very first line of this says, swept away by the current of the four powerful rivers. Now some texts will say by the four currents or four torrents. I mean, whether it's four rivers or four sort of rivers or streams of water that have merged into one, the idea is that you have these four forces that are pulling sentient beings down this river of existence. And so the four things, this sort of current, the usual way that they're taught is that there's four causal factors, meaning four causes that are with the sentient beings that propel them forward into their suffering. So the four causes that are presented are ignorance, which of course is the initial or primary cause of all the other destructive emotions. We talked about that a little bit this weekend. By ignorance here, we would mean, generally kind of any sort of ignorance. But of course, the main one that is being, identified always as the root is the ignorance that adheres to inherent existence, the inherently existent self or I, as well as all phenomena to exist in that way. And that's what we're going to talk about next week in the correct view of emptiness. That's the antidote to that ignorance. The second of the currents or torrents or rivers is the false views that we have. So some of them are involved in that ignorance or kind of an extension of that ignorance, but we have a lot of wrong views, for example. Most sentient beings are under the wrong view that karma doesn't exist, or they've never been exposed to teachings on karma, so they attribute other factors as to why suffering exists in this world. When I teach on karma, I usually talk about, karma being essentially about the fundamental question, why do things happen? Well, every tradition has its explanation of why things happen, and some attribute it to, a greater being that doles out that sort of stuff, to you on the basis of whatever criteria they use. Some people say it's pure chance, that there's no real causes and conditions, it's all just a crapshoot, Some people say there's kind of this power that we might call the universe or whatever, and people say, oh, the universe is going to take care of you, or the universe is going... in Buddhism we say that it's all coming down to our own karma. That karma is the force through which we are experiencing suffering or experiencing what we call happiness. Well, this is a correct view according to Buddhism. Anything other than that is a wrong view according to Buddhism. And so essentially what Tsongkhapa is identifying as one of these currents, one of these causes that keeps being bound up in samsara is not knowing the law of karma. It's a big factor, as I alluded to last week. This is one of the biggest teachings in Buddhism, if not the biggest, is to really get that karma is operating all the time in everything we experience, and we're constantly creating new karma by how we relate to what we experience. And as long as we're attentive to the law of karma, we can control things. We can be in charge. Otherwise, we're completely under the control of this, just like this river that's washing beings down, this river of suffering. The third one is desire. Now again, desire I talked about over the weekend. By this desire, we don't mean kind of a healthy desire, like the desire to become a Buddha or what have you. We mean attachment. We mean grasping. We mean that mind that's our default mode throughout the day, is always trying to get what we want, to fill the needs of the self that we are, grasping at as well. So the craving and attachment that are so rampant in the lives of beings are kind of what this third current is, that's kind of keeping them on this pathway of suffering. And then finally, worldly existence itself, the force of cyclic existence itself, which is the whole round of going from life to life under the control of karma and delusion. So that whole thing of worldly existence or samsara is essentially a factor that is also involved in the suffering of beings. Okay, so this is one part of the analogy. So if you could imagine like somebody who has just kind of fallen into a very, we even have this, it happens in New Mexico unfortunately when we get our summer, what they call monsoons, they're just like downpours. And the arroyos fill up, these ditches that are there in the desert, and they fill up with water very quickly because the water is all running into it from a variety of places. And people get swept away in these if they happen to be in them or near them sometimes. And so that's one thing, like just somebody with arms failing and going down the river, maybe they can grab onto something like a log or a tree and keep themselves from going all the way down and drowning. But the problem is line number 2, They're tied by the tight bonds of karma, so hard to undo. So this is speaking to the fact that karma is the big dictating factor as to what experiences beings have. It's as if we are tied by the bonds of karma. That's why, again, we frequently use this phrase that beings are under the control of their karma and delusions. And even we are under the control of our karma. We can work to create the karma for the things we want to experience and try to diminish the impact of the delusions. But we still don't know what's going to happen, right? We all leave here with kind of a belief that we're all going to get home, go to bed, get up tomorrow, do the same thing, right? But karma can rear its ugly head at any point, Does that. We know people that's happened to. We see it in the news. There's no guarantee that karmic conditions aren't going to change for you like that. And suddenly, you don't have this life that you already have used, for so many years, or you maybe have this life but it doesn't have all the conditions that it had. And suddenly you're not dealing with the same ability to use this life as well. It can change like that, right? So many of you know this, right? Things going on in your life now that you can look to and say, wow, that wasn't happening even a few months ago, weeks ago, days ago. So we see how quickly we're under the control of karma. So this is what it's like. The beings are being under these four currents, but then they're tied by these tight bonds of karma. So they can't even, wrestle free of all of this. Can't even try to save themselves. By the way, I forgot to mention that the four currents could also be said to be the results of all of our, factors that lead us in samsara, which are essentially birth, aging, illness, and death. So that's another way to talk about these four, but the main way that's usually talked about in the commentaries is as the causal factors, the ones that kind of bring us into that existence. And so we're tied with our bonds of karma that are so hard to undo. How do we dismantle all of this? Again, we can dismantle to some degree through purification. I mentioned that last week. We can also certainly try to create at least the karma that is conducive to good conditions in this life. But nonetheless, we're under the control of that. That's also, well, maybe we could deal with that to some degree and still manage to save ourselves from the river. But the third line tells us that we are in an even worse predicament. It's like starting to be one of these Harry Houdini things, Right? Harry Houdini was like all caught up in like chains and locks, but he was also inside like an iron net or like a cage, So, we all know he did these sorts of escape routines, but very hard to escape if you're really tied, correctly and all of that, and you don't have any idea how to do it. So what are we caught in the iron net of? The iron net of self-grasping. So this is where once more ignorance was used in a more general way earlier. Here it's just really saying that what is really keeping us kind of contained is this mind of self-grasping. Self-grasping and self-cherishing that I mentioned earlier are the two main minds that we are always trying to combat. We begin with self-cherishing because it's a grosser form of mind. Self-grasping is happening at a very subtle level through most of our day. So we're not only cherishing and being quite centered on this self and preoccupied with this self, it's driven to some degree by the fact that we are adhering to a sense of self that is total fiction. This is what we'll look at next week when we talk about the third principal aspect. But this is, the idea that it's very, very hard then to rescue ourselves from this state that we're in, because as long as that misconception continues, that clings to a self existing in this way, as long as that's there, we're inside this iron net. We are going to be bound to even greater degree.
How depressing.
It can be depressing. Nonetheless, there are ways out of it. That's the good news. So let's go on then to the next line, which speaks to the fact that we are also completely enveloped by the total darkness of ignorance. This is where they say if it were daylight, sentient beings might be able to be seen from the shore and be rescued. This is true like even in New Mexico when this happens, like you'll see some of these rescue efforts where they're trying to save somebody who's managed to hold on to a branch or something that's on the side of the arroyo, and they're able to see them and rescue them. But if it's happening in the pitch black of night, well then how do you ever see him? How do you ever get rescued? So this is that pervasive veil of not knowing that we have, the obscuration of lacking knowledge, not just with regard to reality, but obviously, the ignorance of karma, the ignorance of other things around this existence that we don't even understand, the nature of samsara as being dukkha. I mean, all of these kinds of ignorance that we're always in the darkness. So this is why we frequently talk about the light of Dharma. The light of Dharma removes that ignorance, removes the darkness in our minds. So this is our situation, and this is, again, we're mostly looking at other sentient beings when we're thinking about this, but obviously this is no different for ourselves. That's why we started with renunciation. But this is kind of going a little bit away from the analogy to then in the next verse, verse 8 there, talk about kind of what the parallels for that are, that we're endlessly reborn in cyclic existence. There is no beginning to our rebirths, and there will be no end to our rebirths as long as this is our situation. As long as that's the case, sentient beings will just continue to be reborn in cyclic existence. This is one of the most valuable teachings to really get this, is the 12 links of dependent arising or dependent origination that are in the Lamrim Chenmo that Venerable Tendrin's gone through. I'm sure she went through that teaching. It's a very complex teaching, but it has 12 factors that kind of all contribute to our continual going from life to life. This is what every being's under the control of, that's in samsara, just propelling themselves forward, endlessly being reborn in cyclic existence. Again, that endlessly is a warning more than it is a fact. It's not necessarily endless. We can put an end to it. Others can put an end to it. But this is as if it were endless. Also, ceaselessly tormented by the three sufferings. Again, I talked about these last week. First suffering, anyone?
Suffering of pain.
Suffering of pain. So again, that's what I mentioned earlier, is the tip of the iceberg. Very easy to get that. That who wants that? Thank you very much. I don't really want a headache or a, illness or any of these kinds of things. Very easy to turn away from that. The second level of suffering. Change. The suffering of change means that even the pleasant things that we have in our lives are in the nature of suffering, because they don't ultimately satisfy, and they will, if we try to engage in them, bring about the suffering of pain. If we think, oh, this is a real cause of happiness, we can see that they actually don't bring greater happiness when we continue to pursue them. They actually bring us greater suffering because they result in pain. They often use examples with food, but I use over the weekend the example of music, right, too. So if you imagine what your favorite piece of music is, and you put that on repeat at home on your device, whatever it is, and then just leave it on for like 2 or 3 days. Just continue to hear it. Is it going to be bringing you the same pleasure it did the first few times you heard it? No, I mean, it becomes painful. At some point you never want to hear the song again. I think that's what we all did when we were kids. I used to get the little 45s and play the hell out of all these singles. I just loved listening to that. Oh, I love this song, and then you get kind of bored with it because you've heard it so many times. And you get a new one. This is what we're doing in our lives. We keep getting a new one, a new thing. And we think that that's the answer to it. If we keep having that new experience, we're never going to get, we're never going to have a problem. We're never going to suffer. Well, you're still suffering, the Buddha is saying. It's just a different type of suffering, a different type of dukkha. The third of the three sufferings is the most involved. Pervasive suffering, it's sometimes shortened to, or pervasive conditioned suffering, compounded suffering. This is the idea that anywhere we go in our lives, any moment of our lives, we can say it's dukkha, because it's fundamentally flawed. It's under the control of karma and delusions. It's subject to the other two types of suffering. We're never really free of that. Recall the analogy I used of like the wound on your arm that gets abraded. I didn't use this, I think, a week ago, but I used it in another class, I can't remember. Anyway, if you have this wound and it gets abraded by rubbing up against something that's very rough, well then that's the suffering of pain. But then if you put a salve over it to kind of soothe it some, then that's the suffering of change. But the fact that you have the wound is the suffering we're talking about here, pervasive conditioned suffering. It's the fundamental woundedness of all of us, that we're in this 24/7 state of it being unsatisfactory. So, This is the case for all beings as well, that all mothers, by the way, that's not just meaning everyone who's a mother in this life, so that, that's once more the idea that we see others as all having been our mothers. All mothers are in such a condition. Generate the supreme mind of enlightenment. And that's where, once more, just these teachings that are in those two verses aren't sufficient in and of themselves to generate bodhicitta. But using the techniques that are on your other sheet that I just went through, a little while ago, this informs your understanding of their suffering. So that when you stop to, for example, think about taking the suffering of others in Tonglen, you can really think about how those beings are in this condition. That being in front of you, say you're working with, and they usually do encourage you to start with the person or being who's closest to you. You visualize them in front of you, and you don't just sit there and go, oh, they're not really suffering, they don't have a headache right now or anything really going wrong with them. Well, no, they have many levels of suffering. This is how they're suffering. It's as if they are caught in these four currents, and that they're bound by they're tied up by the bonds of karma. They're in the net of self-grasping. It's that they're in the darkness of ignorance, and they are continuing to experience not just those grosser forms of suffering, but the suffering of change and the pervasive condition suffering. You kind of can inform your meditation on compassion in particular, because once more, great compassion is the root of bodhicitta. We combine it with love, which is focused on the happiness of others and wanting them to be happy, but the main root of bodhicitta is great compassion. I think I talked about this sometime. Maybe I'm getting it mixed up with being in Raleigh, but essentially, compassion has a different charge to it than love. I mean, if you think about it, when you're generating thoughts of loving kindness, it has a bit more of a warm, happy feeling in a sense. I mean, not that it's completely in that, but when we meditate on compassion, compassion means to suffer with. It means to really generate that empathic connection with the suffering of others, to really feel their suffering as if it were your own. So there's a whole different charge to compassion, and it's really useful as a tool then to motivate us to do something to relieve that situation. And sure, we also want beings to be happy, but there's a greater force with compassion. It kind of hits you a little bit different. So this is the idea behind this. What Tsongkhapa is saying in that verse is that, this is how we should inform our generation of the supreme mind of enlightenment, is by contemplating sentient beings in this way. Let's see if there's anything from my notes that I wanted to share that I didn't. So one thing I want to share, a very short passage from the book that's on your reading list. It's on the very back of this. It's the first one that's there. Again, I think there are some copies out in the bookstore that are free, the free publication, Essence of Tibetan Buddhism. Anyway, I'm just pointing that out. This is on page 24 of that book. It's from Lama Yeshe, and he says, "Bodhicitta is very practical, I tell you. It is like medicine. The self-cherishing thought is like a nail or a sword in your heart. It always feels uncomfortable. With bodhicitta, from the moment you begin to open, you feel incredibly peaceful, and you get tremendous pleasure and inexhaustible energy. Forget about enlightenment. As soon as you begin to open yourself to others, you gain tremendous pleasure and satisfaction. Working for others is very interesting. It's an infinite activity. Your life becomes continuously rich and interesting." I mean, I think we know this. It's not to say that we have it immediately, that, you can just turn it on on a dime and just immediately feel all this focus on others, cherishing them, taking care of them in whatever way. And when I was answering Tracy's question, I mean, it is both. It is strengthening our mind by meditating on these things, but then enacting that as best as we can in the world around us, recognizing our limits. That, yeah, we may not be ready to give our whole body away, but what is it like to part with $1? What is it like to part with $2 or $5 or $10? I mean, how far does it go? Where is the limit? And to keep moving in that direction. But to see that we actually feel good. I mean, most of us have this kind of feeling that comes with being generous and kind to others. And it's not that we do it for that reason, that we become kind of compassion junkies or something, like we want to be able to keep, that altruistic thing going, so we have that high that we get from being that, or doing those things. Rather, the idea is that this is a byproduct of that. Our main motivation is to benefit others, and you feel good along the way. I think probably most of us in the room have had some time in our lives when we were really dedicated to the welfare of someone almost fully, like a child who was sick, or a parent who was ill, or a partner who was in the hospital, whatever, where we needed to be there kind of with them. And although it's difficult, I'm not denying that there's hardship around that. It's also very fulfilling to be able to be with somebody in that space, to kind of be able to be their support, to help them through difficult times. So we know that there's some part of us that's awakened when we do that. I think that's what Lama Yeshe is speaking to. And if we keep moving in that direction, it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, to where that's what we really operate from. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, many of you in the room have seen him. He doesn't, in my estimation, he doesn't have a self-centered, self-cherishing atom in his body. I mean, he never thinks about others. They even said that when he had the stroke in April of 2011, that they actually had to tell students not to come when he was recovering, because he would want to meet with them. He would want to care for them and take care of them, and they wanted, people who were attending to him wanted to make sure Rinpoche healed from that. And so his motivation was always others. When he was in the hospital, many of you heard the story, where he would be thinking about all the beings that must have been in that room before him, and he was really amazing in just this joyful state in the midst of all this happening. And so, I mean, we can see it manifest in some of these beings, but don't think because they have it, there's something special and you could never have that. They're special because they cultivate it and were just like us, but they made the decision to move in that direction. So when we keep moving in this direction and cultivating bodhicitta again and again, we eventually get to a place where we have it more fully. So let's read that. This will probably be all we'll have time for tonight. Verse 8a, which, as I mentioned, actually comes from this book and is Rinpoche's paraphrasing of this. So let's read this definition of having generated bodhicitta. In short, if like the mother whose cherished son has fallen into a pit of fire, and who experiences even 1 second of his suffering as an unbearable eternity, your reflection on the suffering of all mother sentient beings has made it impossible for you to bear their suffering for even 1 second. And then, with seeking enlightenment, rises without effort. I think I missed something in here. Let me go back to the... And the mind, I think that's what's missing there. Let's put that in there. And the mind, with seeking enlightenment for their sake, arises without effort. Then you have realized the supreme, precious mind of enlightenment. Let me confirm that that's what it is. No, the wish. The wish. Sorry, so I put in the with. Maybe I was lifting that. And the wish seeking enlightenment for their sake arises without effort. So sorry about that error on there, but that should be wish. Okay, so as I said, this comes from Pabonka Rinpoche. Let me go to the passage that is in here that explains this in Pabonka Rinpoche's words. Many of you know Pabonka Rinpoche's name because he wrote Liberation in the Palm of Our Hand, which is the Lam Rim text that's used in discovering Buddhism. So he says, all living creatures... this brings us to the third and final section in our explanation of the wish for enlightenment. How to know when you fully developed it. This point is covered with great detail in various works, including both the more extensive and the briefer presentations on the steps of the path to enlightenment. To put it briefly, suppose a mother has watched her beloved child slip down into a pit of red-hot coals. The fire is searing his body. She cannot stand to see it go on for a single second. She throws herself forward to pull the child out. All the living creatures of the universe, all our dear mothers, are burning in the same way, in the unbearable pain of the 3 lower realms and the circle of life in general. when we cannot stand to see it go on for a single second more, when we finally feel the true wish to reach total enlightenment immediately for the sake of every living being, well then, our Lama concluded, you can say you have gained the wish for enlightenment. So that sounds like a pretty out there goal, you know, something we don't have immediately, but that we can kind of set our sights on and recognize that we have to train in this mind. Now, as I mentioned with renunciation, it doesn't mean that we can do that without deep meditation. For both renunciation and bodhicitta, as well as we'll see for the correct view of emptiness, to have these at a very deep level, to make them what we call a realization that sort of changes the fabric of our being, we have to unite them with very powerful concentration. So once more, what I said earlier in regard to renunciation holds true here. Continue to work with them, with the meditation you have, but know that you eventually have to have calm abiding. And the teachings on attaining calm abiding are in texts like Liberation in the Palm of Our Hands, Lama Pavanka Rinpoche's text. And they're essentially based on the same techniques that are taught in the Hindu tradition for developing this state that we call calm abiding, that you go through 9 different levels, different mental abidings that get you closer and closer to that, till you attain this very profound state of single-pointed concentration with this full pliancy of the body and mind. So know that this can be attainable. I think Pavanka Rinpoche in that text, Liberation, he says that you can attain it in as quick as 6 months if you have all the conducive conditions. But of course that means a retreat of 6 months. I don't think it means 6 months in a working life where you're kind of out and about and engaged in all kinds of other activities that distract you from that meditation. This is where you are able to go much deeper because you're lacking all that distraction. Nonetheless, don't think, oh, Don said you could do it in 6 months, so I'm going to take these 6 months off and get my calm abiding. It's dependent upon all the work that you've done prior to that. It's dependent upon, do you have the conditions in place for that to be successful? Most of us, if you go into retreat, you end up just having a mind that's just thinking the whole time about, you know, ice cream and whatever. I mean, all the stuff that we're normally attached to. You know, so know that you have to do some additional work to feel really ready to go into a meditation retreat and get that. But what he's saying here essentially is the measure of what we would call spontaneous or uncontrived bodhicitta, where you don't need to cultivate it through these techniques any longer because you're so familiar with that state of mind. You've arrived at the final step of bodhicitta with such great power through your concentration that you will have it arising naturally. You see an ant crawling on the ground and your first thought is, I need to become enlightened for that being. And you won't have to think, oh, that ant was my mother and that ant must have shown me kindness and I want to repay that kindness. When I can think about love for that ant and compassion for that ant, do tong len with that ant, and then eventually go, and I need to take responsibility for that ant. Therefore, I need to become a Buddha for that ant. And that's quite a thought process, right? That's what all this was. But that thought process supports you having it in that spontaneous way, where it just naturally arises when you see any being or think about any being. And of course, as I mentioned, and I didn't have time to go into this in great detail, but if you go into the prayer book, if you reopen your prayer book to Everyday Dharma, page 209, and this too is in that book, Bodhisattva Attitude, what I mentioned earlier, that has all the faults of self-cherishing and the advantages of cherishing others. This Bodhisattva, he calls it there, Bodhisattva mindfulness. And so this thought training for everyday practice, this is, you know, advice being given on how we do daily activities with thoughts that resemble bodhicitta. So for example, even every time you come here, I mean, you could just choose one of these. Don't think like you have to do all of these pages. There's like 4 pages. You have to do those all every day with everything that you do. Just choose like the first one. He's saying there, with all actions we should cause bodhicitta to arise in our minds, as in the following examples. Number 1, when we go into temples or rooms, such as this Gompa, we should think with bodhicitta, may all mother sentient beings be led into the city of nirvana. I am now leading them just as I enter this place. Again, you don't have to make all those words. You know, abbreviate it to something that works for you. You know, that I am bringing all beings into nirvana and enlightenment as you come into the Gompa. You know, I mean, it transforms what's just an ordinary activity that we do a zillion times, right? In and out of doors, in and out of rooms, all over. This covers so many mundane activities. It even covers when you're in the toilet. Page 212. Second from the bottom, when we excrete, think may all sentient beings' delusions and mental defilements be removed, just as this. So, number 1 or number 2, what doesn't matter. Whatever you're doing, just think you're getting rid of that. You're getting rid of all the defilements of beings, all their delusions. Transforms it, changes what's a normal, ordinary, mundane activity that we all do every day into something that can be really quite profound. Okay? So, this is, as I said, there's a more extensive version of this with Rinpoche's commentary on it and Bodhisattva attitude. That's how we're meant to practice bodhicitta, is to actually bring bodhicitta to mind, have this bodhicitta mindfulness. That's why Rinpoche says to just have mere mindfulness, to just be aware of what's going on at all times, that's not enough. You need to be aware of imbuing what you're doing with something that's meaningful, to transform it into virtuous activity that feeds your own desire to become a Buddha, your desire to benefit others, and in that way you strengthen your bodhicitta and live with bodhicitta. So maybe I'll say a little more on those kinds of things when we reconvene next Tuesday, but it's about 2 minutes after 9. Any 1 or 2 quick questions, if anybody has anything? Okay.
Pretty clear.
Good.
Just have to keep working all
Yeah.
day long.
This is the message we get from our lamas frequently, right? It's just that dedication. But, that's why it's helpful to go visit the lamas. I will give my own little pitch for Light of the Path. A number of you have been to Light of the Path before up in North Carolina. You're not horribly far from it, I think sometimes you guys do a road trip up there, right? With carloads of people. Next May 5th through 30th. You don't have to go for the whole thing. You can go for whatever portion of it you want. Go for 3 days or 5 days or 7 days, whatever works for you. But it's really worthwhile to be in Rinpoche's presence and kind of get the teachings from him. He's got these realizations. I'm up here going blah, blah, blah. All I've done is study for 7 years. I don't have any realizations. So.
A bunch of us too are going to see him next month in Kurokawa.
Right,
So
up in
anyone
Boston.
too
Yeah.
interested in that.
So if you didn't hear that yet, Nicole was saying that Rinpoche is going to be on the East Coast as well, or not quite coast, but along the eastern part of the U.S., up in Kurokawa, which is right outside of Boston, and some folks are going up to see Rinpoche there. But just know that it is really important not just to be Venerable Tender, amazing qualities. I'm not putting her down in any way, but all of us who are just kind of what I more or less call Dharma instructors. This is really our role, is to give instruction in the Dharma, whereas you have these people who may or may not be your lamas, but they're people who have a different understanding of the Dharma, because they live, breathe, eat, sleep Dharma, whereas, most of us are still struggling just to kind of stay one up on all of it. So anyway, that would be my own little pitch for that, because I think it is really worthwhile. Maybe you'll get a visit from Rinpoche sometime soon, too. You guys are going to invite him while you're up there, yes? Yeah. You should. Or at Light of the Path, any of these things. All right, if there's no other questions, then let's go ahead and do a couple of dedication prayers, page 235. We'll do the first 2 prayers there. I like to give a little commentary on these prayers. I'm sorry I give you all this stuff to kind of take in, but the first verse that we're going to recite is really just reconnecting with bodhicitta. The idea is that if we do everything with this motivation, as we've done tonight, we were here listening to these teachings, wanting to become a Buddha for the sake of others, we now seal that positive potential we've created. All those seeds we planted, we protect them and make sure that they ripen into that result of our own enlightenment and the enlightenment of others. And then the second verse, recalling bodhicitta that we've discussed tonight, making this strong wish that this mind continue to grow and deepen in our own hearts and in the hearts of others. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings, without exception, into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Then go forward to page 244, and we'll conclude with these two prayers for these two teachers, His Holiness and Mama Zopa, who I just was talking about, but making strong prayers for all spiritual guides in all traditions, all those beings who are dedicated to relieving the suffering of others, helping them to have happiness. May they all have good health and long lives, and may we and others never be parted from perfect guides. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Then holding in our hearts all those beings who we're particularly moved by at this time, who might be experiencing obstacles, illness, who are dying or who have died, make strong dedications for them, recalling that they have a strong karmic connection with us. We want to be kind of dedicating ourselves to them through compassion for their suffering. Think that their suffering is relieved by virtue of what we've done here tonight, and that they attain all the causes of happiness. And may all sentient beings attain perfect peace and happiness through our efforts here tonight. Okay, thank you all very much. We'll conclude next Tuesday, the third class.
And if anyone is interested in joining us again on Thursday, we will be, John will be leading us in the class on learning to like problems. So that's always helpful. And then Sunday, we'll do the meditation at 10:15 to 10:45. And class will follow the joy of living fully on Sunday. And then after lunch on Sunday, we'll do a Guru Puja too. And then also July 28th is a Saturday full day teaching. More information on the calendar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.